Check this. This is the hard knock life, but not the jigga kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share the interest together with a similar kind. When they said Don Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the end.
Welcome back to another episode of Hard Knock Life. I'm your host, Keith Chow. We're going to be talking about superhero television series, and specifically a couple of television series that are on the CW and DC Comics TV shows that are upcoming. But before I talk about the DC Comics shows, which are near and dear to my heart, I wanted to first catch you up on some of the things that have been going on in the blog this last week and a half. As you know, a couple months ago, Marvel and Netflix announced a historic deal in which they would be doing four TV series based on Marvel characters that will be on Netflix only, exclusively. And those would be the Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist, and a fifth show that brings them all together, Avenger style, in a show called The Defenders. So if you've been following the Nerds of Color, you might have noticed that I wrote a little article a couple of days ago that called for an Asian American to play Iron Fist on the Iron Fist television series, and it's been picking up some steam across the internets. And our friends over at 18 Million Rising built a campaign about that post and created a petition for Marvel that people have been signing to get Marvel to pay attention to us and maybe potentially cast an Asian American actor in the role of Iron Fist. So that's been getting a lot of traction. So I just wanted to bring that up because I have a panel of guests tonight that may have some opinions about that, and then we'll get into some other things because I have a special guest as well who has some insight on some of these superhero television series. So without further ado, let me bring on my esteemed panel of colleagues, and I'll start off up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, coming at us on the Twitter at RSC Spoken Word. It is our favorite Avatar Korra episode recapper, Mr. Rodrigo Sanchez Chavadia. How you doing, Rodrigo?
I'm doing good. Dude, cold in Minnesota. Winter won't go away, but I can't wait.
I know you're a big Avatar show watcher, but we're talking about superhero television.
Yes, let's.
I know that you like to follow those shows as well. But before we talk about Arrow, which is going to be a big point of discussion tonight, I wanted to get your take on what you thought about my call for an Asian American Iron Fist. Do you think that I'm off my rocker for suggesting that?
No, I totally agree with what you had to say, and I've signed it. I've signed a petition for 18 Million Rising. I've shared it. I think it's something that needs to be seen. I mean, there's so much whitewashing happening in Hollywood always, and specifically when it comes to storylines that should be casted for Asian Americans or Asian roles. You know, Avatar to start off with was a big one, but also, you know, just recently what we've heard, you know, with Tiger Lily and the new Peter Pan, you know, there's the whitewashing shows his face again. So I think it's way overdue. I think it's something that I support, and I'm glad you wrote that. So
next up, coming at us live from Norfolk, Virginia, he is a professor of criminology at Old Dominion University, and I begged him to be on the show tonight, despite all his protests against it. He is with us once again, but it's Shawn Smith.
I don't think I protested, man. I respect how insanely tired I could be at this hour.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for being on the show tonight and talking about superhero TV shows. Before we get into it with our special guest, I wanted to also bring up the whole Iron Fist thing with you, and just like I said, there's been a lot of talk on the internet. It's kind of generated some conversation around that whole concept of Asian American Iron Fist. And one of the pushbacks that I've been reading that people have been coming to me with is the idea of by casting an Asian American as Iron Fist, aren't we just kind of perpetuating the Asian martial artist stereotype? And I want to ask you that, Shawn, because I know it's someone who is a big fan of the martial arts genre as it is, as well as a martial artist yourself. I mean, you practice as well. What do you think of that idea that, you know, if we're going to cross-racially cast a character, why would we choose one who would fall into another Asian American martial artist? Not that there are a lot of Asian American martial artists. Number one.
Yeah, and I definitely understand the pros and cons of the argument. I mean, I now that you've told me, at the end of the day, my stance always goes back to when Bruce Lee was shafted on Kung Fu the series. Honestly, that just set a tone that has permeated throughout all mass media, and I mean, the tone was set before then, but with respect to this particular conversation about martial artists and kind of, putting the Asian American actor or actress in a box, at the end of the day, I'm all for good actors and good actresses getting these roles, but at the same time, if we're not even exploring the legitimate, the quality Asian American males and females for these roles, then we're really having a different conversation altogether. So my thing is, yeah, if Iron Fist is a character of Asian descent, then let's at least open the conversation. Let's at least open the auditions to Asian actors. Let's not just assume that, okay, well, an Asian's not going to fly, to the audience that we're making these shows for. Which, by the way, might be the advantage of it being on Netflix. Is Netflix doesn't really have to answer to that many people at this point, so they can kind of be flexible here when it comes to the casting. Let's open the door to have an Asian American at least be a viable candidate for the role. So. And
the thing that I go back to, I mean, and again, as someone who I think that means something from you, like I said, because you actually practice the martial arts as well, and you are a fan of the genre. And one of the things that I actually kind of think about when people talk about the stereotype of the Asian martial artist is that, my issue has never been with the art itself, right? Like, I admire the martial arts. The martial arts is an art form. Like you mentioned Bruce Lee. I mean, the issue with the martial arts stereotype, in my estimation, is not the art itself, but it's the way people have represented that art in Western media, right? Mm-hmm. If you can give me a complex, multifaceted, three-dimensional Asian character who's a martial artist, I will take that any time, right? Like, the problem with the martial arts stereotype is that they've been pigeonholed into this, like, one-dimensional, haya, wata, whatever kind of, just thug kind of background cannon fodder, and has never been, like, whenever they make a character who's multifaceted, three-dimensional martial artist, he happens to always be Caucasian, right? Yeah. And I think that I'm tired of the cliche of the white guy who goes to Asia and becomes better at being Asian than the Asians, right? Because we got Iron Fist is one. The Last Samurai. You have Wolverine. I mean, even Batman. As it pains me to say, Batman is another character who goes like Daniel-san, right? Like, you have that is a tired cliche as well. So I mean, let's give some agency back to Asians.
Comics are definitely. I was just having this conversation. I literally was teaching race and ethnicity tonight. The conversation about should the character be Asian or not? The bottom line is this: television, and to this extension now, I guess digital television, Netflix, what have it. It's a far more pervasive medium than comic books are now. I mean, more people are watching TV through the internet, through Netflix, through Hulu, whatever, than are reading comic books. I don't think that's an unfair assumption to make. So my thing is, at this point, for the fact that there's such reach with something like Netflix, with something like Hulu, I think it's important to show that there is a viable presence for non-white, non-male characters. I mean, I don't even know how else to put it other than that. I mean, it shouldn't matter whether Iron Fist is a white or an Asian character, but the fact that we operate in a society where it is stratified, largely based upon racial categories. We do have to show that there's viable representatives for these different characters across various racial groups, various social categories. So at the end of the day, yeah, you know what? Let's give some representation. Let's give some opportunities to a non-white character, because it's not as if white male characters are struggling to get roles in television or in other mass media forms. I mean, we're talking about Arrow tonight, okay? We're talking about come on.
And thank you for that segue, Shawn, because you're right. And I'll get off my my Iron Fist tip for a second and shift from Marvel to DC because. Right, one of the more popular superhero shows on television right now does feature a white guy in the lead role. But in my estimation, one of the things that I admire most about the show Arrow, though, even though it is, I guess you can even count Ollie Queen as another white guy who goes to Asia and learns because the island is actually an Asian island. Yao Fei teaches him to be that's it.
Never
But
stop.
despite that, the show is fairly diverse for a CW show, especially, and for a superhero show in general, because you have, his right hand man, John Diggle. You have Felicity. So you have like his whole team is, there's women, there's minorities. The villain, the rogues on the show have been played by Kelly Hu, Michael J. White. Even Jason Blood, the actor, is Latino. So I mean, there's a whole lot of diversity. Katrina Law played Nisa Al Ghul recently, so there's a whole lot of diversity on that show. And the reason we wanted to talk about Arrow tonight, not only is it has been kicking a lot of ass in the second season, I have to admit, we have a special guest tonight who's currently working on that show, and his name is Andy Poon. He's coming to us from Vancouver, Canada. He is the concept illustrator on Arrow, and that means he's the one who's illustrated all the costume designs, the concepts for the costumes, the superhero costumes that we've been seeing on the show thus far. So he's drawn the costumes for Black Canary and designed the Arrow costume itself, a lot of the villains. So Deathstroke. So welcome to Hard Knock Life, Andy.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being on. I know that we've known each other like virtually for several years now. I think I interviewed you for Pop Culture Shock, which doesn't exist anymore. So that
right.
That was lost to the ether. I blame John Hanley for that. But thank you for gracing us with your presence here tonight. So just real quick, can you tell us what exactly you do on Arrow as far as like the costume designs and the illustrations?
So think of me as a almost like a trial and error printer that when the producers and the costume designer comes to me with an idea, I essentially explore ideas for them visually. So I do test and error, trial run, every corner, every possibility. Pretty much have the director narrow down his vision before they actually spend the money and build the costumes. And then also, I think because of my background of being a comic book geek, so I think there tends to be a interesting hybrid of me pushing the boundary of staying true of the comic resource, and also, but bringing the grounded reality version of it.
Right. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because as I just mentioned, you and I spoke several years ago about this work, and people may be thinking, wait, what do you mean several years ago? Arrow's only been on the air for 2 years. Well, prior to Arrow, Andy did the costumes on a little show that I am not ashamed to say that I loved called Smallville. And in fact, interestingly, your work on Smallville consisted of designing the Green Arrow costume on that show as well. So if you look on the screen, you see to the left is Justin Hartley as Green Arrow, and to the right is Stephen Amell as Green Arrow, and in the middle is the comic book Green Arrow, which, in the post-Smallville world, the comic book Green Arrow started looking like your Justin Hartley Green Arrow. So how did you feel about that when you saw your designs in the comic?
Well, it is very interesting because I am to this day still wonder about the question of if something we did actually influence the comic book world, or if there was already artists out there actually. I mean, I cannot be the only person thinking about that version of Arrow. So to this day, I'm still trying to figure it out. But yeah, after Smallville, definitely I've seen more and more versions of Arrow that has incorporated details that was done on Smallville. Because I think the Smallville version was actually fairly well received, especially in the comic book community of how close of a translation from the comic book, but while still fairly realistic. I mean, definitely Smallville was a little bit more popcorn, like a little bit more colorful doesn't take it so as seriously as Arrow does, but I sometimes I almost compare it's a like closer to more like a Sentai, like a Power Ranger version of like the DC universe, like in terms of how they brought to life.
The new 52 Green Arrow, like when I first saw it, I mean, I saw Justin Hartley. I mean, they even gave him the goggles instead of the mask, you know. So
Right.
this to me looks like your designs turned into a comic book. So that, I don't know. As you said, as a comic book geek, that must have been really cool for you.
Yeah, actually, I have a really big question. Is I've started seeing the logo of the arrow tip, like sideways arrow tip with the G in it. Now, I drew that for Arrow, so I'm wondering if that thing is already embedded in my head from a comic book before, or that showed up after.
I know
That's
it's like
what
the
I want
chicken
to
and
find
the
out.
egg. It's like the chicken and the
That
egg.
has been burning in my head for like all these years. I couldn't track it down. So if any of you guys find out, please let me know so I can sleep at night.
Well, I mean, so
Yeah.
this is where we're going to start talking about the show itself. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this particular conversation tonight is that one, Arrow returns this week, and it's a big show this week. We're recording on Tuesday night, so the night before
Yep.
the return. But it's the Suicide Squad episode, and then I think
That's
next
right.
week is the Birds of Prey episode. So it's two big kind of like team up episodes, and
That's right.
that brings me back to why, you know, I mentioned this before, that I wasn't a big fan of the show last season. I kind of watched the first few episodes and kind of trailed off, and maybe caught a couple in between. Didn't really follow it too well. But this season, I caught up on Netflix, and then this season I've been watching since the beginning of the season, and it feels like a different show to me, and it feels like they've kind of embraced their comic book roots a little bit more.
I think so, at least in comparison to the first season that really kind of dragged and you were looking for the pebbles or I guess the cake every once in a while to get it. I think at least these this second season has come out pretty strong with all the inclusion of all the Deathstroke, Canary joining the team. It's been really exciting to see. But no, you're right. It's been really good to be seeing it. I watch it and I'm like, wow, seems like a whole totally different show. So
I think for me, Arrow was one of those. It's one of those shows that I kind of binged on, like last this past fall season when I just kind of. It was on Netflix, obviously, and so I saw it and I said, okay, I'll just go ahead and take a quick look. And initially, what impressed me about the show, which it's great that we have Andy on, because I was impressed by the aesthetic of it, the look. It felt like they know this is a comic book, but at the same time, they know that we're trying to make this into something a bit more tangible than just what's on, two-dimensional pages. So almost kind of like, I felt the same way about it that I felt when Nolan rebooted Batman. In Batman Begins, I felt the same way. There was the comic book feel of it, but it felt a little more tangible, a little more, kind of dirty, and dirty in a good way. So I definitely think that the show has ramped up the tone a bit. I was, not that I wasn't already, all chips in, but now I'm just like, yes, every episode after this, I don't care what they're doing. I'm in. Let's get this sucker going.
So Andy, I mean, you worked on the show during the first season.
Yep.
Can you tell yourself? I mean, you're kind of in the trenches on it, but can you sense that it's kind of shifted tone, at least from like something that was trying to maybe shy away from its comic book roots to something that really just, let's just go all in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first character I worked on was the Huntress, and that one at that point, I think they're not sure where the show tonal-wise is going yet. They were very shy about using even purple on her outfit, which is the signature color in traditional comic book. And I think when it started changing was when actually it was Deathstroke when I got the text message. So we're gonna reduce Deathstroke, and they're like, okay, and guess what? We could use the color orange and blue on the suit. And I think just at that point, I'm like, okay, good. And then they're like, I think they are even okay with using hard body armor. I'm like, excellent. And so I think after first season, maybe they've done some research or they've seen what their fan base come from, just how well it was received. They think it was okay. I think we have established our tone, because I mean, especially after following after Smallville, I think they definitely are a little bit worried about like, oh, people if they start seeing superhero suits, they're like, okay, maybe they won't take the show too seriously. So I think after first season, they know that they have set the tone of the show, and now they can explore and actually go out of the comfort zone a little bit. And I mean, like Shawn said, like the look of the show is amazing. Like I give props to all the cinematography. The lighting is so well. It look a lot of the time you look like you're playing Arkham or playing like the Batman game. Especially the prison fighting scene, like the lighting's amazing. They built a whole ship deck in the that episode. So the scope is definitely amazing. It definitely, I mean, if it's not up to feature film, it's close.
Well, so and I think that's why you hear the rumors about, like, you know, they should just, and we talked about this off air, that I mean, they should kind of blend the DC cinematic universe, just because Arrow does feel cinematic as it is.
Yeah, it's definitely not far, but I mean, if you just like upgrade his suit a little bit, you can throw him in the film with Man of Steel. So I think they definitely now they know they can go out of that fan base and be like, now they can actually give it to the true fans, like, okay, we know what we're doing. And the producers, like, if you see them Twitter, like, they are the first one who leak any information. They are true fans themselves, and you can tell. So I think that's why the show's doing so well, because those guys actually care.
I think it was it Berlanti or someone, like, before Canary made her debut on the show, he actually tweeted out this image of her.
Yes, and I was freaking out. I'm like, holy crap, when did I leak that image? Like, I was the only one within the department who has an image. I'm like, crap, did I send it to some friend? But no, it turns out the producer, and then we're like, yeah, the producer, he's a big fan, so yeah. So, and then since then, I'm like, he get all the images out before I do, so.
You worked on the Deathstroke costume design from the first season? Or are you talking about the one that's coming?
Yes. Both. So the first one, now the mask on the first version, which is not Wilson Deathstroke, the one on the island, the mask was already established from the pilot, I believe. It was like the burnt mask on the beach kind of thing. So when I got on board, I'm like, can I redo the mask? They're like, no, we can't, not yet. But I was able to help conceptualize the rest of the outfit. But at that point, I still don't think they have an idea that Deathstroke will play a big part yet, like in the long run. So on the Slade Wilson side, and I got really confused because not far after that, I got the task of designing Slade Wilson. But then I'm like, well, wait a minute, Slade Wilson is Deathstroke, so who is that guy? So I didn't know they were already planting seeds. Now these guys, there's some stuff that I know right now. I cannot talk about it, but like they are planning so far ahead, spreading the seed, that I think that's why the show's doing so well. Because anytime there's something new that pops up, it doesn't feel like they just shoving down your throat. It feels very natural. But then I was pretty happy when I got the call to work on the Deathstroke 2.0, as I call it. But also quite nervous because that's right after Arkham City came out. No, the new one. Is it Arkham City? Yeah.
Arkham Origins?
Origin, that's right. And that Deathstroke is fantastic. So I was like, okay, so what am I going to do now without people saying, you guys ripped it off? So,
and I think that some of the chatter online has been like, it's very reminiscent of the Arkham version of Deathstroke.
Yeah. So yeah, when I first got the task, I'm like, well, I mean, there's so many good things that they've done already. I don't want to completely disregard it. I mean, Deathstroke. Like, people know what he looks like, so there's some elements you just cannot escape from, the mask and some of the straps with the bullets in it. So the one thing I can really grasp on sticking on to is just the tone of how grounded the Arrow show is. And the one in Arkham is amazing, but there's still a lot of elements that are more on the fantasy game side. Like the armor is pretty much designed to be almost a little bit like medieval, like the guard on the neck and some of the pieces on the shin guard. So I kind of stay away from that and stick with more the realistic military tactical standpoint. And so I think that's definitely where I was drawing from. I mean, the elements, I love the elements, like you referenced that Nolan Batsuit, it's all tactical, it's realistic advanced military. So definitely that's more the tone rather than the big blue metal armor. Definitely no scales for sure, no chainmails. That would be bad. But I mean, but even that, the chainmail, we were using the Kevlar to kind of mimic the feeling of that. A lot of people, I am surprised, not as many people complain about Canary not having fishnets, but I did put that little detail from leather straps to just mimic that feeling. So I think
right. You're talking about it's not fishnets, but you give this, and to be honest, like I mean, the fishnets is a very outdated kind of. If you're a vigilante, you're not necessarily going out fighting in fishnets.
That's right.
I actually like Canary's outfit in the Arrow show. I was hoping that when they were gonna introduce that to it, it wasn't be like fishnets or type of stuff, but just something more up to date. More I guess more real, something that people can relate to in that aspect of it. And I think that's one of the things about the show aesthetically and visually that it's appealing. It feels like this could be happening somewhere in where are they filming? Vancouver? Is that what they're filming? Yeah, it could be happening somewhere out in somewhere somewhere in real, not just somewhere. So I think that's what I liked about it.
One thing about the show that has struck me is the martial arts choreography is actually quite good. And I'm starting to wonder when the request is made to design a costume, is the action sequences taken into account? Because one thing I have to imagine is that even if it's a stunt double, they still have to be wearing a costume like the main character, and so they have to be moving around in that. It's something that has come up with. I remember when Michael Keaton was talking about Batman, and he mentioned it, and Tim Burton mentioned it too, that there were times when they had to really rewrite some of those fight sequences because you can't move. I mean, they've actually changed the physical look of the cowl and everything since then, because at some point Batman does have to turn when a villain is punching him. Anyway, so that's my question: is there ever any discussion between you and either the writers or the director or of an episode, or even the fight choreography team, as to, hey, our guys need to move a certain way, so when you design the costume, is that ever
Oh yeah, that happens actually all the time. I mean, okay. By default now, because now we know what type of fight sequences they normally do, we almost always have to make sure the side panels have some stretchy material or is plated so they can lift their arms through throws. It's getting more elaborate and more. It's just so much more intense now. The fight sequence with the mirror crew now happening, everybody's got super strength.
Fighting.
So yeah, and even before we know that, stun guys naturally their version of the costume would be a stretchier material that still kind of looks like the original one, but no, we're trying to design the costume as if these guys are not stunt guys. So if these guys are actually out there fighting crime, they want to be able to move. Right. So where you put the panels on the side or where you put the elbow pads, it's those things are all taken considerate into these decisions. So sometimes they're not, actually all the time they're not just for look wise, they actually function almost have to be first.
Mhm.
And I remember, like, I think the original Arrow costume from the pilot actually has had to be modified because it wasn't flexible enough. So,
Yeah.
so I think even that costume has been evolved.
Well, and that's an interesting point that Andy brings up about like kind of the way DC live action properties kind of address the whole adapting from the comic book page is always, and I think they took it's the page out of the Nolan playbook to like ground it in reality, like Andy was saying, make it tactical, make it look realistic, and it's an interesting kind of like difference between like how DC approaches live action superhero costumes and how Marvel approaches superhero costumes. Because if you look at like the Avengers, they don't shy away from the primary colors. Like Thor is bright red, like the Thor cape is redder than the Man of Steel Superman.
That's right. That's right.
Iron Man is bright red. Captain America is red, white, and blue. And then the DC ones tend to dull the colors. They want to make them dark. Like the Green Arrow's green is very dark green. Superman's blue is very dark blue. Batman's not. He doesn't even wear gray and blue. It's like he's just black. So,
right.
Rodrigo, I mean, what do you think? Like, do you think that like Marvel's superhero, at least just aesthetically, we're not getting into like the essence of the characters or anything like that, but just aesthetically.
But I agree. I think Marvel is just trying to stick to what they're known for and what works for them. Which is, in this case, sticking to the traditional attire. I mean, I was hoping that they would upgrade Captain America's look, but
yeah, I'm not a big fan of Captain America's Avengers costume. I did like his World War II costume. Well, but Shawn, I know that I mean, you and I actually talked about this earlier today. That like it's kind of ironic that DC's live action approach is to kind of make it more gritty and realistic. When if you look in the comic books, like DC's like traditionally like. Maybe not the New 52, and we won't get into my issues with costume design in the New 52. but like just lines everywhere and high collars and stuff like that. That makes it edgy and cool.
That's right.
But if you look at traditionally, like the DC heroes had always been like the bright primary colors, like they were the non-realistic ones, whereas the Marvel characters were always like, they're the everyday heroes, right? But now. It's taken the flip, right, Shawn? Like in live action adaptation, that like DC strives to be realistic, whereas Marvel strives to be fantastical.
Right. Yeah, and I think what it's doing is, and again, this is where my comment about the Arrow aesthetic comes in. It's allowed Marvel to set a tone that transcends the material. In other words, even if I didn't follow Thor, which I didn't, by the way, and even if I wasn't a huge Captain America fan or really didn't follow Iron Man, and even if I didn't know who the characters were, once I walk into the movie and you see Iron Man for the first time, or you see Thor land on the plane in the Avengers, I mean, it's the character basically jumps at you. There's no question you're seeing something that is supernatural, and especially once they actually start fighting on screen, it literally stops being a movie at that point. It just becomes a comic book, and you fall into that. It strikes an aesthetic. It strikes a tone that I think is it's really starting to carry the steam for the follow-up movies.
So anyway, I mentioned earlier that Andy, before working on Arrow, did the costumes on Smallville. It was famously the Justice League, the nascent Justice League costumes. So that so the ones you're looking at the screen, the Cyborg, Aquaman, and I guess he wasn't the Flash. He's
the Blur.
Superman wasn't. He was the Blur. But I'm talking about the guy. But you had nothing to do with Clark's costumes, right?
No,
in any incarnation.
I wish I did.
But you worked on
Impulse, yeah.
Yeah, so you worked on the Justice League in Smallville, and I bring that up because before we went on air, you talked about how much of an action figure enthusiast you are, and how cool was it to see like action figure versions?
Oh, you got one. That is pretty. That was I had a moment. I kind of check one of my lists. I did it. One of my childhood dream. I mean my daytime job. I work in animation studio, so I have other action figures before, but definitely something that has been translated to real life costume and then action figure. That was definitely like a moment. Yeah. I heard there might be some Deathstroke figures and Canary as well coming.
You worked on, like we called him Impulse on Smallville, I guess, but he was a prototypical version of the Flash. And before we end, I wanted to just bring up to the panel one other thing about upcoming television series, and that's the Flash series that's coming out. And I know that Shawn and Rodrigo, you've I'm sure have seen the images of Grant Gustin as Barry Allen, and we've been talking all night about how DC comic book superheroes tend to adjust their looks when they get translated to live action. What do you think of the new Flash aesthetic? And this is based in the Arrow universe. I mean, it's a spin-off of Arrow, so if it gets picked up, which I think it will, I think most people.
It's kind of no-brainer.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge show. But what do you guys, Rodrigo and Shawn, think about the new look Flash?
I'm trying not to be a hater. So too early to call this.
But if you feel like Andy had nothing to do with it, so don't worry about hurting.
Well, no, you know what?
Honest.
Again, going back to the point about the costumes. Before you ever hear the character, before you ever see an action sequence, before you ever see a fight scene, the first thing you see is that still shot, and it strikes the tone. I will say that it kind of looks like Barry Allen said, hey, you know what, Oliver? I like your costume, but I can't make it green, so I'm just going to make it red. I mean, he literally I can't think of a better costume, so I'm just going to do what you did, but make it red. I mean, honestly, if that's actually why the costume looks the way it does, that would be hilarious to me. But with that said, it's okay. Like I'm not thrilled with it, but I will say this though. I kind of think that with the Flash's costume, if you really think about it, the Flash costume has always been kind of I don't want to say not a good costume, but okay, in comparison, Superman's got that,
You are going to incur the wrath of many a fanboy by saying the Flash.
I'm just saying. Superman's got the giant S, and everybody knows, hey, boom, it's in your face, and Batman is Batman. I mean, Batman's Batman. I'm Batman. I kind of feel like Flash is a costume that I can see the conversations being hard because at the end of the day, it's always going to be all red and yellow. It can't be the Flash if it's not that, and it kind of has to be a costume that, again, you can move in because the character is all about constant movement. You can't have armor, okay? You can't have like all this bulkiness that some other costumes have. He's not going to have a utility belt,
Sorry, I had a new 52 in my throat.
Right. So anyway, so I'm lukewarm on it. Let's just say right now, I'm lukewarm.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, and once Batfleck's costume gets revealed, which the rumor is that it's to be revealed in March, and we're in the middle of March, so who knows?
Wow.
Supposedly awesome.
It's supposed to be awesome. We'll see.
Kevin Smith approved.
Does it have
that geek?
Just no nipples, as long as
there's no nipples.
No nipples.
But once that thing gets revealed, I'm sure people are going to forget about the Flash. People are going to forget. That's the one costume people and Wonder Woman's costume in too. I think those are the two that everyone is kind of chomping at the bit to see. But who knows? I mean, until then, at least we have Arrow, and we have to look forward to seeing the Suicide Squad this week with Bronze Tiger and Deadshot and everyone together under.
Sorry, I need to chime in. In the trailer of the Suicide Squad episode, did you see the back shot of a girl with messy pigtail?
Yeah, is she supposed to be Harley Quinn? That's what everyone on the internet is saying.
I believe that's Harley Quinn.
Nice.
Whoa.
Nice.
I took a screen cap and asked everybody, and she
But on that awesome note, we're going to thank Andy for being on the show. I really appreciate you chiming in and sharing your experience working on Arrow and Smallville. And if you get a chance, check out Andy's website, andypoondesign.blogspot.ca, because you're up in Canada, right?
Yep, I'm up in Canada. I'm one of those.
Canada.
You one of those.
I should be working on like Captain Canuck or something.
I know. What are you doing with all these American superheroes?
That's right.
But anyway, thanks for being on the show. It was really awesome to have you.
Anytime.
And also thanks to my fellow Knox, Rodrigo. Catch him on Twitter at RSC Spoken Word. And also finally, big thanks to Shawn for staying awake. Find him at Old Dominion University teaching classes. And big up to Nelson
Sleeping there too.
at A Risings for putting us all together and herding a bunch of cats. So
That's right, yeah.
That's Hard Knock Life for tonight. I'll see you next time.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV, yeah. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard Knock Life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share their interests together with a similar kind. When they said Don Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments, and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NOC.